need to come to an understanding, whether it's on mental health issues, whether it's on domestic violence, or when it comes to, we'll just call it mass violence, whether it's ideologically motivated or non-ideologically motivated. We need to understand and help our community members know the difference between getting help and snitching. That is very, very important. Knowing the difference between getting help and getting snitching, and that when getting help, that part of the understanding of getting help is not always just about calling law enforcement, but trying to develop the capacities at a local level by civil society within our own communities that don't involve law enforcement sometimes. Because I'll give you a good example. There are two examples that I like to give, but for this purpose, just one of them is back in 2010, there was a young Somali American kid by the name of Muhammad Osman Mohamud. Came from a broken household, had some substance abuse issues, was living with his father. His mother was living elsewhere because of a divorce. Had some struggles in college, even though he was a well-liked individual, but having some identity issues and occasional run-in with the law. And so the father's had a rocky relationship with his son for a few years. And one day, he hears his son starting to spout off some rhetoric from Al-Qaeda, because the son happened to stumble upon some materials on the internet that were extremist in content. What does the father do? He doesn't call the imam, doesn't call a social worker or anything else. That doesn't come to mind. He freaks out. He calls the FBI instead. And what the Federal Bureau of Investigation, kind of like your RCMP. Yeah. And what ends up happening is that the FBI, they're not social workers. They're law enforcement investigators. And their job is to surveil, arrest, and prosecute people.
It's the hammer.
Right. That's right. They're trained to be a hammer, and they see everything as nails.
Yeah.
And there's a place for that.
Yeah.
Okay. But in this particular case, this is a young man, though, who was saying things, but he wasn't necessarily doing anything. And clearly he came from a confused background. But the FBI agents doing what they're doing, they sent in an informant and an undercover investigator, sort of coaxed the young man along to say, would you be interested in taking this to the next step? And the young man, who, full of bravado, full of braggadocio, talking big, puffing his chest up, said yeah. And over the course of a few months, this investigation led to the point then where this young man said, okay, I am willing to detonate a bomb at a Christmas tree lighting ceremony. And eventually what ended up happening was that when the undercover agents and informants, put him to this plot and he pressed the send button to detonate the remote controlled explosive, the FBI swooped in, arrested the individual. That young man is doing 30 years to life behind bars. His life is effectively ruined.
Ruined, yeah, it's over.
It's over. Okay? He's not going to be getting out until maybe he's 47 or so.
Yeah.
That's provided if he even gets parole.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that I, as your fellow Muslim, and I'm saying this not just directly to you, but to the listeners, but also as a researcher as well, I'm saying that there are opportunities and possibilities then to do a sort of third path between either doing nothing and freaking out, or freaking out and going in the extreme opposite direction and calling law enforcement at the point when a young man is maybe saying some things that might be disturbing but hasn't taken steps toward criminality yet. And we want to try and find a third path where we can, and that's where intervention comes in.
I struggle with the question of what is the point that we can identify that this person is beyond the point of no return. I'll give you an example. We had a convert in Victoria. This young brother, he's from Nigeria, Christian background, and Christianity is taken very seriously in his household. For whatever reason, he ended up finding truth in Islam. He accepts it, but then he gets surrounded by a particular group of people who, by the way, because of the direction the mosque and the community was going in, they found us to be heretical. We're the more traditionalist side. They don't like that. And so they weren't even involved in the community that much anyways. And so he got surrounded by these individuals. They started giving him the right kind of teachings to take him down that, extremist path. And he ended up having a fight with his father when he came over to visit, when he was at the mosque to try to understand what's going on with his son. Why is he becoming a Muslim? And that was his initial concern. But all of a sudden, this young man went within a period of 6 months of just trying to figure out the issue between Jesus Christ and the Son of God and all of that stuff into, we need a caliphate and we need to have our glory back. And when I heard about what's going on with him, I thought, 6 months is a very short amount of time for you to encompass Islamic history and legal theory and all of these things. So clearly you're not saying this from your own self. You've been fed this stuff and you're saying it. Now, all of that is still just talk. He's not saying, I want to do this. And he's just saying that the Muslim Ummah is down and out and we need to revive this. And so it's still, I guess, would be considered political talk. He's just expressing an opinion. He disappears. Next thing we know, he's in Libya with ISIS. So we talked to the RCMP about that. There was no point at any time that he expressed a direct statement that they could act upon. And he just kept spewing this rhetoric. And if you talk to the people that surrounded him, they will disavow ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of these groups. Yet what they were feeding him, basically, they take the horse to the water and then they step back and see, like, what are you going to do? And they'll tell you, don't drink the water, but they will do everything possible for you on your own now as a young man to put 2 and 2 together on your own. They don't have to spell it out for you. I mean, these people are very clever in how they coax these people into doing these things. So from a CVE perspective, I tried to talk to him.
Some people would even say that the law enforcement does the same thing when they entrap a lot of them.
Yes, the entrapment works,
They put the water and then they just step
back. So we tried to talk to him. We tried to say whatever we could. We tried to quote all these people. But in the process of indoctrinating this individual, there is also a dismissal and a refutation of any other attempts to try to counsel and show him the other way around. And he got to the point where he just disappears, and sure enough, he's off in Libya now. God knows if he's alive or not. So how do you deal with that from a CVE perspective? Like, at what point do you intervene? And when you try to interdict or interject, he's not listening to you anyways. And he's dealing with people that are not even in... This is the point that I have a problem with CVE in the community. From my understanding, individuals that are like that, they're not really that involved, most of them. They're not that involved in the community for the community to have that type of positive impact and bring them and turn them back around. So CVE, from my understanding, focuses on a community that by and large doesn't really have these elements within it or even the power to impact these elements that are outside of it. How would we deal with that now?
To listen to the full episode, please visit Imanwire.com.